This is one of the worst basketball video games of all time. In fact, I think that this is one of the worst video games on the NES in general. Magic Johnson's Fast Break just isn't fun. And it's really a waste of a major celebrity name. Ah boy, yeah, here we go again. Okay, so a lot of you guys already know that there's this grand tradition of YouTubers who do reviews of horrible games, and you know already who I'm talking about. There's a pretty well-developed genre out there of retro game criticism videos, but one thing that you'll realize when you watch that stuff is that most of these guys don't know sports games all that well. In fact, in a lot of cases, the reviewers really don't know what separates a good sports game from a bad one since they don't care about sports in the first place. And you know, I think that's the reason why these really, really awful sports games end up being ignored by these guys. So I suppose you're stuck with me, like the mildly irritated, you know, video game nerd or whatever you want to say. Anyway, Magic Johnson's Fast Break in the NES is bad. Yeah, it's really bad. But the crazy thing about this is that the game that it's based on is even worse. Anyway, this is the arcade version of Magic Johnson's Fast Break. I don't think I need to say too much more about this. This game is awful. It's just awful.
Nice shot.
Now you'll notice that there are some issues with the emulation. The computer-controlled team score doesn't display, for example. But the awful frame rate is legit, at least from what I can tell. This arcade game is almost unplayable. Anyway, believe it or not, there is an explanation for this. You see, Magic Johnson's Fast Break was originally created to be an Amiga computer game. In fact, the arcade game is literally an Amiga computer game from 1988. Like, the inside of the arcade machine is an Amiga computer. But let me slow down a little bit and explain to you what's going on. Okay, this is what an Amiga 500 computer system looked like. This is from 1987. Now, the Amiga was a series of computers that Commodore put out starting in 1985 as an update to the old Commodore 64 line. These computers were especially popular in the United Kingdom and in Europe, but they didn't really catch on in North America. So that's one of the reasons why you might not have ever heard of the Amiga. Now, I didn't know anything about these old computers until a little while back. You see, I became interested in digging into the history of soccer video games, and it turns out that all the great classics from the United Kingdom came out on the Amiga. Meanwhile, the classic computer games that I grew up with and that I remember playing from like the late 80s, early 90s, those were all released for IBM and compatible computers. So it's interesting how that works. Anyway, the Amiga computers continued until around 1993 with hardware that got better as time went on. The final computer was this CD32, which really was a game console. And this featured one of the strangest controller designs I've ever seen. Now, it's no secret that the Amiga was designed in large part as a video game playing computer. That's actually pretty similar to the Commodore 64, which was primarily known for its gaming capabilities. And so it's also not really that much of a surprise that a company out there thought it would be a good idea to turn the Amiga computer into a dedicated arcade machine. That company was Mastertronic, which specialized in making low-cost computer games in the mid-1980s. So you might know it for games like Kickstart and the Commodore 64 if you were a Commodore fan. Anyway, back in 1987, Mastertronic started to make waves in the computer game industry by making some strategic acquisitions. The US branch of the company came up with a plan to create a company called Arcadia Systems to create arcade games. So the idea was to use an Amiga 500 computer system in the arcade cabinet itself. Now this was a pretty creative idea, even if the games that they made for it weren't really all that great. Well, this is what the machine looked like on the inside, and it took me a little while to find these pictures, by the way. As you can see, the games in the arcade unit came on boards like this, and yeah, a single machine could host multiple boards at the same time. This was a pretty brilliant concept, and it was clearly designed to help keep the cost of the arcade units down while enticing different types of players to try out the same machine. And as you probably guessed, this was the big selling point behind the system. Of course, this is not a unique idea. Those of you who study video game history know this already, but I'm guessing most of you probably don't. The thing is that other arcade companies were doing pretty much the same thing, including at least one that was doing the same thing at the same time, and there is a good reason why. Now, I know you guys have heard of this one, the Nintendo PlayChoice 10, which could play up to 10 cartridges at once. That system took specially designed game cartridges and could hold up to 10 of them at the same time, hence the name. And the game carts looked like this, so this is the so-called black box version of baseball. The Neo Geo operated under the exact same theory. The hardware was the same and the game cartridges could be interchanged. And so you would see Neo Geo machines that looked like this without any game-specific advertising. So you remember when I talked the other day about NBA Superstars, right? The newest NBA Jam type game that I can't afford because it costs like $5 or whatever to play a quarter. Well, the NBA Superstars problem is the reason why these companies were doing this in like the late 80s and throughout the 90s. You see, it's expensive to build an arcade machine. The high cost means that you've got a distribution problem if you're trying to sell these games. A lot of companies just can't afford it, right? So the idea is to allow those companies you're selling it to or leasing it to, renting it to, whatever, to run several games at once on the same unit so that they can maximize their profits. So in theory, it also means that if they buy your computer, your machine, it's easy for them to swap the unpopular games for popular ones in the future. That was the whole idea behind Arcadia Systems. Now the problem, of course, is that Magic Johnson's Fast Break totally sucks. I'm not even joking. This game is ridiculously bad, famously bad.
Nice shot.
There's this sound delay that just drives me nuts. Half of the time I can't even tell what I'm doing. The animation is stiff and awkward.
Good move.
It's just a bad game, maybe the worst arcade basketball game ever. So for a little while, I thought that there was a problem with the emulator, and there are some problems, by the way. There's some things that aren't displayed right. Whatever version of MAME I'm using isn't quite doing it right. But then I took a closer look at the Amiga version, and it turns out that the problem was not just the emulator. The Amiga version was officially released in 1989 and was called Magic Johnson's Basketball. It's exactly the same game, which makes sense because the arcade game was literally an Amiga computer game on an Amiga computer. Now, I tried multiple different copies of the disc, but none of them would work in my emulator. They all froze right around this point. However, I did find a random Greek YouTuber who recorded himself playing the game on original hardware. And as you can see, the same frame rate and the same stuttering problem still exists. Anyway, I've linked to his video in the description, so please go over and show him some love. Anyway, the whole Amiga arcade machine idea was just a massive failure. The one thing that we can thank Arcadia Systems for is inspiring games like Arch Rivals, which eventually gave us NBA Jam. But the truth is that this game really never should have been released. Now, if this company had, proper playtesting, if it wasn't just trying to shovel out cheap crap, then the game probably would never have seen the light of day. Now, the NES version is pretty bad, but at least it flows somewhat smoothly. But it's still just an awful game. In fact, you can make an argument that it is the worst game on the platform. So I know that a lot of you freaked out in the comments section when I said that about Ultimate Basketball. That was the worst basketball game of all time, right? Well, the Magic Johnson game happens to have a couple of really, really awful things in common with Ultimate Basketball that are really notable. The most obvious is that it's almost impossible to pass the ball in bounds. The trick here is to move the guy receiving the pass down the court. If you keep him on the other side of the court, the pass will likely be intercepted. Ultimate Basketball has a similar problem, except that you can't control the guy you're passing the ball to. So you're supposed to wait or move or something? I don't even know. I still think Ultimate Basketball is worse, though both games are admittedly really, really bad. So that's got to be like the most basic sign of a bad basketball game, right? I mean, you can't even pass the ball in bounds, right? That's a sign that the game you're dealing with is really, really bad. Like, how are you supposed to start playing? Now, the real fun part of the arcade game is when you're called for a backcourt violation right after winning the tip-off. I actually saw that happen on the attract mode as well, which is completely ridiculous. Now, you can't run out of bounds, by the way, but you can be called for a backcourt violation, which is insane. Now, not letting you run out of bounds is a good thing, right? I mean, you can't go out of bounds in NBA Jam, for example. But this is a 2-on-2 game, so why keep that stupid backcourt violation rule in place? Now, there are times where you'll make a mistake, especially when you're on defense, and it becomes impossible to avoid issues like this. So the problem is the way these buttons are set up. So the control unit, which is a hilarious way to call the controller, is set up so that A shoots on offense and either steals or blocks on defense. B is the change player button. You pass on offense and change players on defense, which is pretty simple. But the problem is that A passes the ball when you're passing it in bounds. It's easy to accidentally hit A right after a made basket because you were mashing it while trying to play defense. Now, this is the sort of problem that you really have to play the game to understand, but let me tell you, it's really, really frustrating. Now, all NES basketball games have control problems. This is because there are only 2 buttons on the NES controller, obviously. But if you play Double Dribble, you'll never find yourself wondering whether the button that normally shoots is going to suddenly pass. Tecmo NBA Basketball's controls are also pretty easy to figure out, even if they're not the best in the world. In Magic Johnson's Fast Break, the controls are just bad, and they feel really stiff too. Half the time, I feel like I have to push A over and over again to attempt a shot, and I don't understand why. Defense in this game is just completely overpowered, which, by the way, is something that all the NES basketball games have in common. It's way too easy to steal the ball in this game. Your steal stats are going to be through the roof. Ultimate Basketball is similar, actually. The computer steals the ball like there's no tomorrow in that one. In Double Dribble, you can take advantage of how easy it is to steal the ball. That's actually one reason why the game feels like so much fun. And of course, poking the ball free in Tecmo NBA Basketball is easy to do once you figure out which player you're controlling. In Magic Johnson's Fast Break, however, your best strategy is to simply shoot 3-pointers all day long. This is because your shooting percentage is basically the same no matter where you shoot it from. But it's also because the computer will steal the ball from you if you try to drive. Now, speaking of shooting, yeah, the shooting in this game is just horrible. I mean, it's beyond bad. It looks bad, it feels bad, it's bad. Sometimes your guy will jump. Most of the time, though, he'll shoot one of those old-fashioned set shots. The computer likes to dunk, but I haven't really figured out the best way to dunk yet. The arcade game is worse, actually. The awful frame rate means that you can barely see your player taking the shot. This game is just so poorly programmed. I mean, that's all that there is to it. Okay, so what do we have so far? So your passes are always intercepted, so you shouldn't pass. They always steal the ball from you if you drive, so you don't drive. The shooting mechanics suck, and the computer always figures out a way to score when you can't do anything. Am I missing anything? Oh yeah, there's only 2 teams, right? There's no players in this game either. They're just generic colors. The NES version just has 2 generic teams and no real replay value. Depending on how well you do in the game, you'll get a salary at the end, which is your final score, I guess. The arcade version only has 2 teams as well, though at least you can play as Jordan Michaels and Jerry Thorpe. And the Amiga version uses the same player names. I mean, it's literally the same game. At least Ultimate Basketball lets you choose from some teams. Even Arch Rivals gives you at least some choice. In fact, Harlem Globetrotters is the only other NES basketball game I know of that only gives you 2 teams, but you can still choose if you want to be the Globetrotters or not. Anyway, you're probably getting the idea by now. I mean, everything about this game is bad. The arcade game was horrible, like unplayable levels of horror. Actually, even though the game is atrocious, the NES version of Magic Johnson's Fast Break is a vast improvement over the arcade game. But seriously, I can't believe this game was ever even released. How does it compare, though, with the worst games on the NES? Now, the thing about some of those notorious LJN games is that they're not quite as bad as you might think. Friday the 13th is a maze, sure, but it's nowhere near as bad as its reputation. Jaws is tedious, but at least there's some variety in gameplay. Magic Johnson's Fast Break offers you no replay value at all. You should earn a medal just for playing through a complete game. It's that bad. But the thing is that Magic Johnson's Fast Break, as bad as it is, really is not the worst game on the NES. No, there is a game that is much, much worse. LJN's NFL is completely, horribly, amazingly bad. We're talking Action 52 levels of unplayable. See, you can play Magic Johnson's Fast Break in about 10 minutes or so. It took me an hour to play a single game of NFL football, and it was an hour of the screen going about this speed. I seriously suspect that NFL is the worst licensed cartridge on the NES, and that nothing else is even close. So this is one of the reasons why I talked about those other reviewers at the beginning of this video. The thing is, if you don't understand sports games, if you don't play them, if you don't enjoy them, you might not realize just how bad this game is, right? Magic Johnson's Fast Break is a horrible, horrible game, but it's an even worse game if you're a basketball fan. I mean, there's nothing here at all for basketball fans. It's just boring. The whole thing is just a wasted opportunity. I still find Ultimate Basketball to be more hilariously bad, by the way. But Magic Johnson's Fast Break has no redeeming qualities at all. And the arcade game is just a failure. The Amiga was a better computer than this. This game should never have been released, and I really hope you never play it. Anyway, there you have it. I'm starting to think now that maybe it's a toss-up between Magic Johnson's Fast Break and Ultimate Basketball for the worst basketball game on the console. These games are really, really bad. In fact, if you're in the wild and you see these games and you're tempted to buy it, I recommend buying it and destroying it so that we can have fewer of these games on this planet, because we would be much better off without it.